All right, welcome everybody. So we have people piling in. Thank you so much for coming today for our panel through the Watson Institute. My name is Ben Frijon. I'm a junior here at Brown. I'm studying public policy. I've been very involved in the Watson Institute since I've gotten here. I'm on the Watson DEP committee. I took two of the study groups in this spring of 2020, one with Senator Heitkamp and the other with Chairman Steele. And I've really taken every opportunity I can to be involved with Watson. I think this is one of the best things about Brown. And one of my favorite things about Watson is that it connects us with so many amazing people. Us students get to interact with some of the smartest policy minds in the world. And we're with three of them today. I'd love to introduce them here. So first of all, Ambassador Keith Harper is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. He's the first Native American to be named a U.S. ambassador, serving as a U.S. permanent representative to the UN Human Rights Council from 2014 to 2017. He's represented the plaintiff class of over 500,000 individual Indians and served as a counsel in the landmark Indian Trust Funds lawsuit, Cobell versus Salazar, which ultimately settled for $3.4 billion. Is the largest settlement of lawsuit against the United States in history. From 2010 to 2014, Ambassador Harper served as commissioner on the President's Commission on White House Fellowships. And he's also the chair for Native American policy in the 2008 Obama for America presidential campaign, and then served on the transition team. And he's teaching a study group right now at Brown, for which I'm one of the TAs, and it's been a great experience so far. Dr. Kakenya Ntaiya experienced female genital mutilation as a young teenager in preparation for her child marriage. Her life was set to follow the traditional Maasai path of ending school to become a wife and mother, but Dr. Ntaiya had a different dream. She negotiated with her father to return to school after surviving FGM, and when she was accepted to college in the United States, she promised her community she would use her education to serve her rural Kenyan village in exchange for their support. She went on to earn her PhD in education from the University of Pittsburgh and returned to her community to fulfill her promise. She founded Kakenya's Dream to educate girls and end harmful traditional practices, including FGM and child marriage, and transform her community. And in 2009, the Kakenya Center for Excellence boarding school opened its doors, serving 30 vulnerable Maasai girls. Today, Kakenya's Dream reaches thousands of young girls and boys and community members in rural Kenya. And finally, the son of immigrants from the Dominican Republic, Tom Perez, class of '83 at Brown, grew up in Buffalo, New York, where he learned the values of a union town: hard work, integrity, service, and perseverance. After putting himself through college with Pell Grants and working on the back of a garbage truck, Tom passed up offers from white shoe law firms, instead choosing to start his career as a civil rights attorney for the U.S. Justice Department. He had the privilege of serving in President Obama's administration, first as head of the Civil Rights Division, where he led the charge against police misconduct, voter suppression, and anti-LGBT discrimination. And then as Secretary of Labor, fighting to promote and expand opportunities for America's working people. And just recently, he was elected chairman of the Democratic National Committee, where he led his party to victory, not only in the White House, but in both houses of Congress in this last election. So I'm very honored to host this panel with three amazing members, and I'll let you guys take over from here.
So I think we're sort of just going to start with some kind of initial comments, and I guess where I'd start is the sort of moment that we are in as far as the political atmosphere of this country, and really in much of the Western democracies. And it's really a time of extraordinary peril. We see the chipping away of the fabric of what has been a sort of cardinal principle in the United States for many decades, and that is democracy and one person, one vote, and these sort of fundamental ideas that I know Tom, for example, litigated when he was at the Civil Rights Division, head of the Civil Rights Division in the Department of Justice. And we're at this moment where the people have lost faith, and I think that one of the things we really need to think about is to ask the question why. And part of that answer, it seems to me, at least part of the answer, is that there has been for the last few decades a growing divide between the haves and the have-nots. And every year it gets worse. Many observe it, make the observation, but we have not shifted fundamentally policy to address the inequities. And those inequities, in my judgment, breed a sort of poison that infiltrates the politics in a way that is truly destructive. So I think we're at this opportunity, and societies go through this from time to time, where we can either fundamentally make the world fairer, or we're going to increase the poison in the political atmosphere. And so we need to figure out ways in which we can bring greater equality to all folks. And that's something I think that is true in the United States, and I think it's true in many countries around the world.
Kakenya, would you like to go next?
Please go ahead, and then I'll speak.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's such an honor to be with you, Kakenya, and with you, Ambassador Harper, and Ben, with you and all the students. I'm Tom Perez. I'm coming to you actually from the office I share with other fellows here on the second floor of Watson. We just had our last study group session today. And as Ambassador Harper said, our democracy, not just here, but elsewhere, is on fire, and it's a 5-alarm blaze. And the title of our study group was Leadership and Governance in Challenging Times. And my goal in our study group was to make sure that people run toward the fire. I know we're all sort of trained to run away from the fire, but we need more first responders to address this crisis of our democracy and this crisis of democratic values around the world. And I love the fact that between the three of us, we've got a lot of communities covered in terms of our own experiences, both life experiences and what we have been thinking about and fighting for throughout our career. And the main thing I want to communicate to all of you is that in times of greatest moral crisis, that's often been when we've made the most progress in rewriting the social compact, at least here in the United States. I think about that very personally because I had the privilege of serving as the head of the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department under Barack Obama. And I worked there on and off for almost 15 years, and it was a labor of love. Most of the laws I enforced there were a product of the civil rights movement of the 60s. And then in the second term of President Obama, I had the privilege of serving as your labor secretary, where most of the laws I enforced at the Labor Department were a product of the New Deal. Now think about that. If we're studying history right now, those were 2 decades of remarkable struggle and sacrifice and courage and ultimately accomplishment. We were able to rewrite on many levels the social compact of the 20th century during those 2 tumultuous decades. I think we're in another one of those moments right now. It's what Reverend William Barber, who I think is one of the moral leaders of our moment from North Carolina, it's what he calls the third Reconstruction. And so I come to you with sobriety born out of the fact that our democracy is indeed on fire, and it really is a 5-alarm blaze. But I also come to you with optimism and hope that you will all stay engaged, because one thing I learned at Brown, and one thing I've learned from coming back to Brown, is that this is a remarkable place. And you are all so well equipped to become those first responders, whether it's here in the States or around the world. We need you to jump in, and we need you to help us to address so many of the challenges that we will discuss over the next 45 minutes.
Thank you, Ben, for hosting this wonderful discussion. And it's great to be with you, Keith and Tom. I'm really honored to be here to share some of our experiences. I think my work has been focused on women empowerment and girls, and looking at some of the harmful practices and injustice that have happened to women and girls for centuries. So when we talk about, laws and policies, and I work from a very practical angle where, we implement laws and never get, we pass laws, but it never get implemented on the ground. As both you, Keith, and Perez are talking about democracy, I think politically our world is going in a very, very dangerous direction. I think it's not just in the US, it's throughout the world. We are seeing a lot of just kind of going backward. I think the progress we have made over years, I can talk specifically from our country, Kenya. It seems to be that leaders are just coming from the same circle of friends and people who have been there for generations. And I think that really looking for this discussion where mine is always to tell young people and, those who are in colleges, and don't wait. I think we tend to say we want to wait, the right time will come, I'm still young. We need you to be at the forefront. I think it is important that we run to the fire, as you say, and start making these changes. And, we need a new leadership. And that's what I work in empowerment of women, to make sure that the next pipeline of leadership come from people who are ethically and socially minded, that are able to make change and stand for our people and people throughout the world. I think that's where, let me stop there and I'll entertain any questions to that effect. Thank you.
All right, we have a lot of attendees here. Thank you so much for those statements, everyone. I have some questions to kick us off, and then we'll defer to the audience. Again, any attendees, feel free to use the Q&A button in the bottom right to ask whatever you want. So my first question is for Chairman Perez. Last week, two really shocking things happened. An Atlanta team won a championship, which I was pretty happy about. And the other, it could be not so good. Very shocking results in Virginia in the gubernatorial race, and in New Jersey as well. Ended up being a lot closer than expected. So two questions. First of all, do last Tuesday's results alter your strategy running for governor? And second of all, do last Tuesday's results alter your strategy thinking back to your previous role in leading the Democratic Party?
Well, the first thing I need to do, Ben, is to remind you that we're in Red Sox country. So, this is Red Sox country. So, some would argue that your first statement was fighting words. So
anyone but Houston, I'd say.
Yeah. No, I was watching Tuesday's results with obvious great interest around the country. There's good news and there's challenges. The good news when you look around the country is the number of remarkable leaders that got elected. We've got mayors of color in cities like Pittsburgh, first time African-American mayor, Cincinnati. We have a mayor of color in Seattle. We have New York City. We have Boston, 40 miles to our north. And so, we see more and more things of that nature happening, and it reflects both the diversity of our nation and the diversity of the Democratic Party. And I'm really, really proud of that moving forward. In Virginia and New Jersey, we lost Virginia, we won New Jersey. And what are the lessons to be gleaned? Well, Terry McAuliffe got 600,000 more votes in last week than he got when he won in 2013. It was a high turnout election. And by the way, there's no Democrats claiming fraud, okay? It was a high turnout election. And similarly in New Jersey, Phil Murphy was the first Democrat in 40 years to win re-election. It was definitely closer than expected. And, one of the lessons that is true in politics, I call it the laws of physics relating to politics. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. When Barack Obama won in 2008. Bob McDonnell won the governor's race in Virginia in 2009. When Donald Trump won in 2016, Ralph Northam won in Virginia in 2017. And the things that I've learned from both Virginia, I'll take Virginia in particular, is that we need to make sure moving forward that we continue to engage our voters during this time where we're in the verge of, well, we've just accomplished something remarkable last week with the infrastructure bill. We're 2 weeks or so away from accomplishing something even equally remarkable in the human capital infrastructure bill. And one of the things we have to do, and frankly, if those bills had passed 3 months ago, I think Terry McAuliffe, there's a good chance that he would be governor. Because Joe Biden's approval ratings over the last 3 months have undeniably taken a hit, and that had impact on Terry McAuliffe. One of the things I learned in my own race for Maryland governor is something we're already doing, and that is making sure we're organizing everywhere around the state. Glenn Youngkin outperformed Donald Trump in rural pockets of Virginia. And Donald Trump did pretty darn well in the rural pockets of Virginia. You got to organize everywhere. And then you have to make sure that we are talking about the issues that are the kitchen table issues. Keith said a few minutes ago, one of the abiding issues of our time is just income inequality. People are struggling. They're taking it on the chin. And what they want to know in a governor's race is, what are you going to do to help me feed my family? What are you going to do to make sure my family has health care? In Maryland, what are you going to do to make sure we implement this remarkable blueprint for educational reform? What are we going to do to tackle climate change? And in Maryland, we have an opportunity to become the offshore wind capital of the United States. And in so doing, not only address our climate challenges, but address our, create $30, $40 an hour union jobs over the course of decades. And so what we're making sure we do in our campaign is talking about how I am going to make your life better. Glenn Youngkin was very effective in redefining the closing days of that election. So they were talking about dog whistle politics like critical race theory. Critical race theory doesn't exist in Virginia. He promised to issue an executive order banning it. It does not exist, but he was able to effectively utilize that. And that's a lesson that we learn. And so organizing early, organizing everywhere, expanding the electorate. In Maryland, we have an even more diverse population than Virginia. Virginia is diverse. Maryland is even more diverse. And one of the things we're doing is making sure we're engaging everybody in that electorate. So, in short, I think that Maryland, which is one of 6 states in the country that's majority of people of color, when we build as we are that really wide-ranging, every county, a diverse coalition, and we are talking every single day about the dinner table issues that matter most to people, that's how we succeed. I'm proud of the fact that when I led the DNC, we had 16 Democratic governors 4 years ago, and we had 23 when I left. We flipped, I think it was 8 state legislative chambers. We obviously the White House, the Senate, the House as well. And, trying to run the table every cycle is very challenging thanks to those laws of physics. But I think what we can do as a party, and I've talked to folks who are my friends there next year, what we have to do is make sure we finish the bill, the remaining infrastructure bill, and then make sure we are relentlessly talking to people, not about the price tag, but about the policy, how we're reducing childhood poverty, addressing climate change, putting people to work, expanding access to a child care tax credit that's helping lift hundreds of millions or tens of millions of people out of poverty. The things we're doing to help people, relentlessly marketing the remarkable things. We gave them a $1,400 check. We're putting shots in their arms. We're bringing this pandemic to an end. When we talk about those issues, Ben, I think that's how we succeed. And that's what we have to do heading into the midterm cycle.
All right. And then you mentioned Democrats doing better in rural areas. That was going to be my next question. So much of the success on Tuesday, it seems, was in cities. So Seattle, Boston was a huge win. In your hometown of Buffalo, they almost elected a self-proclaimed socialist. But in Virginia, I think you really see a lot of the Democratic Party is increasingly unpopular in rural areas. Youngkin won, had 45 counties where he got over 75%, mostly in Western Virginia. So what do you think the strategy should be to gain ground in these rural areas for the Democratic Party? Because it seems like the polarization is a geographic issue. You know, I heard Bill Maher once say that there's no such thing as blue states. Every state is a red state these days, and some states have cities that are big enough to overtake the red areas. What do you think the Democrats should do to gain ground again in rural areas?
Well, we did gain ground in the 2020 cycle in many rural areas. One of the reasons we won Wisconsin, for instance, is that we were able to reduce the margin of Donald Trump's victory in rural Wisconsin. That doesn't mean we won rural Wisconsin, but we lost by less. And that's really important. And I'll tell you what I'm doing in Maryland is the same thing I'm doing everywhere. I'm talking about the issues that animate people. Broadband is an indispensable issue, frankly, across Maryland, and including but not limited to rural Maryland. If we want to bring jobs to Western Maryland and the Eastern Shore of Maryland, which are some of the rural pockets and some of Southern Maryland, we need to make sure that there's broadband. And I firmly believe that broadband is like water. It's an essential public utility that should be affordable and accessible to everyone. And we will not be able to have long-term economic development in many pockets of Maryland and in many pockets of America until we have that access to affordable broadband. Similarly, the opioid epidemic has touched every corner of Maryland and frankly, every corner of America. We have a remarkable opportunity coming up in the settlement of the opioid lawsuits against the Sackler family who killed people with what they did. And I'm talking about that in rural Maryland. I'm talking about that in urban and suburban Maryland. And when you talk to people about issues that they care about, issues that have touched their lives, that's how you connect. And when you show up, and frankly, Democrats all too frequently just didn't plain show up in rural America, and that's insulting. And that's certainly what we're doing in my campaign. We're showing up everywhere. You know, we've got contributions from every county in the state, and we've been around everywhere in the state. And that's what Democrats have to do, is not just show up, but listen and respond to people. Showing up is the first step. Being responsive and demonstrating your actions and your commonality of interest is the next step.
Fantastic. And again, anyone in the audience who wants to ask a question, feel free to submit to the Q&A button. My next question, I'll transition over to Ambassador Harper. Foreign policy has not been on the forefront of really anything in the last couple of years. It seems like domestic policy has really been more popular, but that doesn't mean it's any less important. This week in Taiwan, the U.S. requested supply chain data from Taiwan Semiconductor, and this is going to be a huge strain with U.S.-China relations in our recognition of Taiwan and the kind of the sharing of data that a lot of tech companies based in Taiwan are obligated to do to both the U.S. and China. As you know, and Mr. Ambassador, I'm very interested in tech policy. So do you have any comments on what's going on in Taiwan, what's been happening in the last couple months?
Yeah, look, I think we're probably in a more perilous situation regarding Taiwan than we've been in decades. The U.S. policy has essentially been one of intentional ambiguity, where nobody knows if the U.S. will do anything if one way or the other if China were to do something with respect to Taiwan. But look, China policies over the last decade have become far more muscular. You just need to look at the activities in the South China Sea. They're ignoring of decisions of binding arbitration tribunals regarding their litigation with the Philippines. And I think Taiwan is just yet another example of China sort of showing itself as a different kind of force on the world stage. I think it would be a mistake to be too reactive to that from the United States. We need to continue to do what we think is important for our equities without being antagonistic. I would hate to see an escalation here, and I think there's actually no need for it. It's important to draw lines with any of our international foe. But at the same time, we don't want to get into a position where we're throwing fuel on the fire. So I think we're again at a delicate time with respect to look. The situation right now is Taiwan actually, for all intents and purposes, acts as an independent country, except with respect to international relations at places like the UN. In all domestic affairs, they're essentially independent, and I think that's good for Taiwan, and that's good for the United States, and that's good for the world, frankly, because you have an entity that has moved from a few decades ago having sort of an autocratic system to one that is highly democratic at this point, with a studious, steadfast commitment to rule of law. So it's important to the United States that Taiwan stay free and independent. I think especially after the disaster in Hong Kong regarding the two systems policy, kind of losing Taiwan would be highly problematic. But we don't want to aggravate the situation. We just want to draw lines. And so I think that's the correct balance there. I think more broadly speaking, it's, the Biden administration has shifted its focus to Asia, and specifically to be a counterbalance to China. And that is essential. We've got to support Australia in China's actions vis-a-vis Australia. We got to support Taiwan. Where we have strong allies in South Korea and in Japan, we need to support them as well. So I think our approach needs to be one of simply being steadfast to our values, making sure we're committed to drawing lines, but not aggravating the situation unintentionally or just because of making mistakes and overreacting.
Right. So you mentioned the balance of support without, like you said, throwing fuel on the fire. What are some non-military ways that we can support Taiwan and some of our other allies who might openly welcome our support as a nation?
Well, I think some of this is probably already happening. Much of diplomacy happens behind closed doors, and I'm sure State Department is having a lot of conversations with the Chinese, stating what our equities are in Taiwan, but that we're not going to publicly attempt to poke China in the eye. And then we will want our allies to do that as well. So you have a coalition of countries saying to China, these are the rules of the road in order for us not to escalate the conflict. And again, diplomacy, effective diplomacy, is based on counterparts fundamentally understanding what you're prepared to do, but also understanding how you intend to not that taking action publicly is a last resort, and that should always be a last resort, because publicly shaming countries merely escalates things without having a pathway to resolution.
All right, our next question from the audience is for Kakenya. Can you please talk about how successful Kenya's dream has been in improving education for girls in Kenya, and how you face resistance to these changes? And then if I could just add to that, sort of the same question I asked Ambassador Harper to you. What are some ways your organization is a nonprofit? There's a lot of NGOs that do a lot of fantastic work in Kenya. What are some policies that the U.S. Can adopt to support some of your mission in Kenya?
Thank you. Our success has come from really investing the time and staying in the community. Nothing that we do is done from outside. So for many years, I have spent so many meetings, so many times just having conversations with people in the community. And I think that's what Tom Perez was trying to say, that, currently in the US, people don't talk to each other, and I understand it's because of the pandemic, but mostly you live in this neighborhood, you don't even know your neighbors. There's no that part of conversations. Our work is really embedded in the community. There's nothing I do without the local chief knowing what is going on, the elders in the community. And at first it was like a foreign thing because I was the first woman from my community to go to college in the US, and coming back, it was like she really came back. So there was that kind of a doubt, but it was also that part of I became a role model to the people in the community on how does an educated woman look like, what can she do with us? And the task of building a school for girls and working with girls, they had not seen a project that a woman is leading. So a lot of men used to have a lot of doubts on what we can accomplish. But at the heart of all that I do is really involving the entire community. So we work with the fathers, we work with the mothers, we work with the girls, we work with the boys. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to empower a girl and then leave her alone. She needs an empowered community that is within her. And that's really what has been working for us. We are also very holistic. We just don't focus on academics because, yes, it's good to focus on the academics, which we work with in partnership with the government of Kenya. But when it comes to health, food, nutrition, meeting some personal needs, girls do miss school because of sanitary towels. So you need to be able to provide that as, learning materials. It's really being very holistic and being very intentional and bringing the community with you. We are able to eradicate some of the harmful practices. So all the students that we have, over 600 girls who have gone through our program, who are free from these harmful practices. And that has been possible because the community is really part of that success that we are working on. When you talk about, most international organizations, the UN, the US, aid, USAID, World Bank, all their funding goes through government. And so small organizations like ours cannot really directly benefit from the support from these big entities. And I think that hopefully there are ways that can change, because at the end of it, what we are seeing that, yes, most international organizations, you come and you work in a place which is comfortable, that has internet, that has running water, that has paved roads. And then when the paved road ends and the water ends, you move out and you leave the last mile where there's no access. And so that's really why it is critical that the work I do is in the community where there's no running water, no paved roads at the last mile, because rural communities throughout, not just Kenya, but throughout Africa have been left out. And I hope that movements and organizations and NGOs can really start focusing on that last mile where resources are needed, because even the government does forget that last mile. And it's really us to move beyond the comfort zone and really create change where change needs to happen in the local communities. Thank you.
Ben, can I just make a comment regarding what Kakenya just talked about?
Absolutely.
More generally. So I just want to say to folks on this on this Zoom. Kakenya's work is incredibly important. If we could change one thing in international policy, in policy of other places, in order to assure sustainable development, if you could only do one thing, the one thing you should do is empower women. And this is not just me sort of saying this ex cathedra. There's actually a plethora of studies that demonstrate that fundamental, sustainable, and effective development is the empowerment of women. Access to capital, access to education, stopping violence, stopping child marriage, all the full panoply of women's issues. If you get that right, the likelihood of having successful, sustainable development goes up dramatically. And if you get that wrong, the ability to get sustainable development is essentially not achievable. So this kind of work where they're actually building something that ultimately empowers women and girls is so vital, and is the way that we're going to take many, many people out of poverty over time.
Amen.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I can for all of our attendees, I can distribute more information about Kakenya's dream. The work you're doing is really fantastic. All right, our next question is for Chairman Perez, and it is about the perception, at least, of elitism in the Democratic Party. So the way I always interpreted politics is that the Democrats were the party of the working class and the plebeians, and the Republicans were always the party of big business in the patrician class. And it seems, I'm not saying I agree with this, but it seems that most of the country now thinks it's the opposite, that the Democrats are the party of the elite and the Republicans are the party of the working class and working Americans. So this question asks, first of all, Mr. Perez, why do you think that this happened? When did this flip occur? And what can Democrats do to reverse this perception, whether it's valid or not?
Well, after the 2016 election, when I ran for DNC chair, and then my friend Keith Ellison and I were working at the DNC together, one of the first things we did was we took on what was called the Unity Reform Commission. And these were a series of reforms where we brought together diverse stakeholders from the entire big tent of the Democratic Party to come together around a series of reforms designed to return power to our grassroots, designed to address concerns such as the question you put forth about the Democratic Party perhaps being the party of elites. And let me give you one very concrete example of something that we did, and we did it authoritatively, which is there were these delegates to the convention called superdelegates. And there was a concern that had been continuing for some time that I shared, that the superdelegates perpetuated this image of a Democratic Party as not being truly the party of the people. So our reforms that we undertook in 2017 and 2018, and together, and these were folks, some had supported Senator Sanders, some had supported Secretary Clinton, some had supported others, and we all came together around these reforms, and we dramatically limited the role of superdelegates. We implemented incentives to move us from caucus state to primary state. Why is that important? More people vote in a primary than they vote in a caucus. And so I'm a big believer that when more people vote, that's good for democracy. As a result of that, when we went into the 2020 cycle, remember in 2016, before the Iowa caucus, nobody had voted, and Secretary Clinton had 500 votes or 400 delegates to the convention because of superdelegates. In 2020, there was no such thing. The day before the Iowa caucus in 2020, nobody had any delegates because we changed the rules to return that power to the people. And you look at elections in 2017, 18, 19, and 20, we did pretty darn well because we were, I think, speaking to the issues that mattered to people. Healthcare was the #1 issue in 2018. We were talking about healthcare The other side was talking about caravans coming in from Mexico because they wanted to change the subject. And in 2019, again, places like Kentucky, where we had lost working class voters in the 2015 election, we won that gubernatorial race in 2019. And a short time later, we won re-election in Louisiana because we were able to win over regular folks who understood that while Donald Trump talked a mean game, it was Democrats who were fighting for him. And that's how Joe Biden won in 2020. We need to continue that work. I'm not here to tell anyone that work is done. That's a timeless journey. And I think one of the most important things we can do is make sure we're educating people about what we're doing. It's only one party that's fighting and has implemented a child care tax credit that has done more to reduce childhood poverty in this country than anything in decades. Not one Republican voted to support that. It's the Democratic Party that's fighting to make it easier for someone to form a union and engage in collective bargaining. When we have collective bargaining, we have collective prosperity, and it's Democrats that are fighting for that. Look at the infrastructure bill that just passed last week. That's the biggest investment in infrastructure since Dwight D. Eisenhower was president. Who's going to benefit? It's going to be, everyday Americans, union workers who are going to have access to good $30 an hour jobs. That's how we build the middle class. The reason we started losing elections is people felt that they were falling behind and they didn't see the Democratic Party fighting for them. And the reason we've won elections in recent years is because I think we've been able to make that case. We've got to continue to make that case. That's a continuing journey. And the journey of 2022 is to make sure that people know what we've accomplished. 40% of the American people are currently unaware that the $1,400 check they got was a result of the American Rescue Plan. So we need to educate people on who put that check in your pocket and who fought against putting that check in your pocket. And so that's a big part of what we're doing. And we got more work to do. But again, I think the proof is in the pudding. We won a lot of elections over the last 4 years. We have headwinds now that we have to confront. And I think when we pass this next bill, that's going to get passed in a couple of weeks, we're going to have an unprecedented amount of examples of how we're helping everyday Americans. And that is going to help us overcome concerns that some voters undeniably have about our party.
All right. Next question from the audience, from Ambassador Harper. Are you familiar with the Waconee community and Red Cloud Renewable? How can greater awareness be raised toward the LTC needs disparities and elder populations within our Native American reservations? Do you know of any advocacy efforts on this front?
Well, I don't know the specific entity identified, but with respect to elders, I mean, I think that the general approach to tribes is that we ought to leave the establishment of both objectives and priorities to the tribes themselves. This is the idea first came to light or came to fruition in the 1970s, and has been the governing policy of the United States ever since. And that's just the idea of what's called self-determination, tribal sovereignty, the idea that it is far better to let tribes themselves and their elected leaders make decisions on their priorities and their objectives. So there are various programs to ensure that elders are taken care of. But overall, what I would say, to make this a little bit of sort of broader aperture, we just need to, and one of the things that's happened recently in the American Rescue Plan, for example, is additional resources that are going directly to tribes, and that allowing tribes themselves to figure out which of the issues they need to resolve. And this is not theoretical either, in the sense that if you look at where tribes are today, there's still many challenges, but tribes are better off today than they were a decade ago. And they're better off a decade ago than the decade prior to that, and so on and so on, going back for 50 years, because we have a proven track record that those people who are closest to the challenges are the best people to cultivate and figure out the solutions. So on all of these issues in Indian country, the role of the federal government is to be a resource, to provide resources, and to be a resource to ensure that tribes can have the ability to institutional capacity build. But then ultimately they should be making the decisions for themselves on all issues, including how to address disparities vis-a-vis our elders.
All right, and then our next question. Yes.
When I had the privilege of serving as labor secretary, one of the things that Ambassador Harper and others were really vigilant and successful about as it related to tribal sovereignty. And I'll give you a very concrete example. We give out workforce grants to states, and it enables them to help put people to work in in-demand jobs. And before President Obama became president, in order for a tribe to get access to that, they had to apply through the state, as opposed to what should happen is treating them as a sovereign to sovereign. And what we did was we changed that under President Obama and Ambassador Harper and other people's leadership, so that a tribe could apply directly and receive directly, because it is the tribe that's in the best position to figure out what are the opportunities in our jurisdiction. And the notion you had to get a permission slip from the state in which you happen to be, frankly, it was insulting. And I'm really glad that we changed that. And that's why it's so important to have people like Ambassador Harper and now Secretary Deb Haaland, at the table, so that decisions like this are made.
Well, I should just say, look, whether as head of the DNC and or as labor secretary or civil rights, Tom has had this extraordinary record of being a close friend of Indian country. During his tenure as the DNC, he actually was able to make the Native Americans a caucus rather than a council, which gave far greater engagement for individuals in the Democratic Party. So he's walked the walk for Indian country.
All right, we've got about 7 minutes left. My last question is going to be for all three panelists, specifically Chairman Perez, though. It's on crypto. So that's a huge issue these days. Bitcoin is over 60,000. We're starting to see a lot more use cases of a lot of the different networks and how we can decentralize finance, decentralize a lot of economic services that are important to people. What are your thoughts on crypto? It seems overwhelmingly that the Democratic Party has taken more of the negative stance, at least in relation to the Republican Party, on cryptocurrencies and on blockchain technology. But we see exceptions. For instance, Eric Adams just said that he's going to take his next 3 paychecks in Bitcoin as mayor of New York. So open-ended question, whatever anyone has comments on that.
Well, I read about what Mayor-elect Adams is doing, and I have not been as engaged in this issue, other than I've been watching it carefully because I see that it's important. There's a generational dynamic on crypto. I've had this conversation with my son, who's a college student, who is very forward-leaning on crypto, and it seems like for some a generation older, there's a desire to tread carefully so that there are not any unintended consequences moving forward. And so that's my main concern is I want to make sure that we're doing it right, and I want to make sure that everything we do is informed by the data moving forward. And when I deal with issues like this, one thing I make sure I do is have a really good group of experts around who can help us make those informed judgments.
And Kakenya, do you have anything you want to add to that? There's a lot of I don't know if you've heard about any of the the blockchain technology that's taking over in Africa. In my opinion, that the continent that'll determine the future of the technology of blockchain technology and crypto is Africa. So just an easy you case that's taking on all the time is the use of crypto for remittances. Are you aware of any of these efforts, and do you have any thoughts on it?
Well, I haven't been following to the deepest of it, but what I know is that technology is definitely the place that people are going, and my job is to make sure that I get a lot of students doing technology and IT and exposing themselves to that so that they're not left behind. Yes.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we got about 5 minutes left here. So wrapping up, the last question I want to ask, and this is for all three panelists, so I want to hear everyone's answer on this, is in this age of disillusionment and turmoil across the country, do you have any advice for college students in how to stay engaged, how to keep being first responders, how to keep up the fight to try to work out our differences and try to better this nation?
Well, if you look at some data that just came out from Tufts University, maybe 2-3 weeks ago, Gen Z participation in the 2020 election occurred at a record rate. I think it's really important for us to stay engaged. Your first question to me was a good one. It was about Virginia. The reality in Virginia in 2021 was there was record turnout. They had a greater turnout than we did. But again, Terry McAuliffe got 600,000 more votes than he got in 2013 when he won the election. And that's not, you can't attribute that just to population growth. There's not that much population growth. It's that people are turning out. And we need young people to continue to do that because, as the parent of 3 kids ranging in age from 19 to 25, I'm always inspired by how you push us. By how you educate us. And what we need moving forward, and again, I get back to what I said at the outset of this talk. My goal in my study group was to make sure that people didn't get discouraged. This is a moment in time where we have these attacks on our democratic institutions, and we need folks to step up as you have. We need folks to get involved. We need folks to run for something. We need folks to continue to stay out there and stay engaged in protesting and all the peaceful demonstrations of our democracy that you have been doing now more than ever. We really are in a battle for our democracy. We've defeated Donald Trump, but we haven't defeated Trumpism. And just as when Joe McCarthy got censured in the 50s, McCarthyism didn't go away the next day or the next week. It took people stepping up. The arc of the moral universe, Dr. King said, is long, but it bends toward justice. But it never bends on its own. And I've always been inspired by how Brown students are part of bending that arc. So we need to bend it together. And time is truly of the essence.
Ambassador Harper, do you have any advice for how students can stay engaged?
Yes, look, I echoing what Tom said, look, I think this is a critical time for men and women of conscience, for all people of conscience, to really step up. This is a time where, look, the United States has a long tradition, and we should be proud of this long tradition of self-correction. But self-correction is not preordained. It takes activism. And in a lot of ways, I think what students of your generation look, I'm optimistic because I've engaged with students and people of your generation, Ben, and I think that their values and their desires are going to lead us well, and we're going to need to rely on that. But I would say that you have to have a combination of patience and impatience. Patience in the sense that these things always take longer than you'd like. These self-correction processes. So you have to be patient in waiting for results, but you also have to be impatient in the sense that you can't just sit idly by and expect it to happen. You've got to get out there and be active and be a force for the change that needs to happen. And we talked about income inequality. There's other things that are, I think, poisoning our body politic. And we have to have young people out there being at the forefront of these changes and finding their best way that they can contribute to do so.
And mine to add on to what has already been said, I think the biggest thing that I always tell young people is to educate yourself about the issues that you are passionate about. Ask questions, go out, don't wait for the perfect time, because that perfect time never happens. Be involved and more, get out of your comfort zone, go to the next neighborhood and figure out what's going on out there and learn just to educate yourself. And as I said, be part of the solution because everybody has a part that they need to play to make our world a better place. So watch out what your place is and work on your place. And then that's how we move forward. So I wish all of you the best and really enjoyed my time at Brown. And I look forward to meeting with all of you. And as I say, we're looking to you to really push us to the right direction. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. I'm very optimistic about the future of this country and the future of the planet, especially with leaders like yourselves, and especially with my peers at Brown and the people that I've gotten to interact with through Watson. So thank you everybody for coming today. And this is going to be recorded, I believe. So I think it'll be posted somewhere. But thank you for coming, and till next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Fine discussion.
Have a good day.